I wouldn't necessarily want to change what I did. There's a lot of regret there, but it definitely made me who I am now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tell him, you're going to go through a lot of difficult things, and you've already gone through some pretty tough things. But you're going to be okay. And maybe you should try to pursue the Lord a little bit more than you do. Make sure that that's your foundation. But ultimately, you got to figure it out because you've kind of been fed with a silver spoon your entire life.
Men's Alliance is tribes across the nation that meet weekly for rugged outdoor workouts and real-world devotions around a fire. We are changing what Christian men's ministry in this country looks like. And when you're ready to challenge yourself physically and spiritually, join us at men'salliancetribe.com. Welcome to the Men's Alliance podcast. Guest with me today, can't wait to hear his story, Cody Truitt, call sign Rebar. Welcome, Rebar.
Thank you, Goose. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. I was super stoked to be on your podcast. So,
man, we met under unusual circumstances. So Rebar has a ministry. He has a podcast that we're going to talk about today and how that got started and everything, called Of Sound Mind. And so I was on the Of Sound Mind podcast, and that's really how we met. But then Rebar has gone on to launch a Men's Alliance tribe, Damascus tribe, in Ohio. He's just north of Dayton. So if you are listening to this and you are around the Dayton area, go check out Damascus tribe. If you're south of Dayton, go check out Anvil tribe. So no excuses for you. We've got one north and south of Dayton, Ohio.
that's right.
And so that's a little bit of how we met and then what happened. But I want to just hear your story today, hear your war story, if you will, on how you came to be here. How did you get here today? How did you go to starting Of Sound Mind and then getting into Men's Alliance and starting a tribe there? So all things men's ministry. Tell us a little bit. Start back as far back as you want, because I'm interested in hearing the story. I know you've got a lot of interesting things about you that I won't spoil, but being in the Army is one of them. So, just share some of your story, bro.
Yeah, and so my story isn't one of heroism or it's kind of, so I actually grew up in a kind of Christian family, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But I didn't, grow up in a rough area. I didn't have, I grew up with both of my parents. They both were married throughout all the way up until my 20s. And, so I didn't really have a lot of struggles, so to speak. Both my parents worked really hard, and we had pretty good Christmases here and there. I mean, we struggled every now and then because my dad, he owned his own roofing business, and my mom was a teacher. So we had some times where, the groceries were a little scarce or, stuff like that. But ultimately, I mean, we had a pretty easy life financially. And so to go back to the kind of Christians who, we'd go to church on Sunday. And we actually, as a young kid, I was heavily involved with the church. We'd go to Christian concerts. I'd do youth group on Tuesday nights. I'd go to church camps and all these things, right? And
you grew up in Ohio? Were you in Ohio?
Yep, I grew up in Springfield, Ohio.
What type of church were you guys in?
It was non-denominational. It was
okay.
Yeah. And so, they had all the activities, youth groups, and we had church camps and stuff like that. So I tried to stay as heavily involved in that stuff as I could. My mom definitely was pushed that, which I appreciated. But, based on my understanding now of what a Christian family looks like, that's not how we were. And some of the stuff I'm about to talk about, I love my parents, and we've had conversations now as I'm an adult about our past and stuff. But I just kind of wanted to throw that disclaimer out there. But growing up, they we only were Christians when we were at church. When we went home, no, Dad didn't read the Bible. Mom didn't read the Bible to us. We didn't pray together as a family. Um, and pretty much, Facebook was kind of new. And so my mom would, on Facebook, my mom would post all of us on her Facebook, and we were the perfect family. And everybody thought we were just really happy and a really perfect family. Um, but my mom and dad were both abused as kids, physically and verbally. And, they didn't abuse us physically, but definitely verbally. There was a lot of manipulation and a lot of things going on there behind the scenes. Um, and my dad just couldn't get his self under control. Sometimes he'd just go ballistic and say some silly things, call us stupid, and compare us to his uncle who lived with their parents, who was 30 and kind of a bum. So we would get this this kind of manipulation and this so I didn't have a lot of self-confidence growing up. I was a really small kid, and it definitely affected me in a lot of ways, and it still does today. Maybe not so much as it did then, but so. But anyways, I tried to stay involved in the church as much as I could, and I felt actually. Go ahead.
How did they take that when you have confronted them, or you've talked about this with them now that you're an adult? How did that go?
So
did that go well? Do you have a good relationship now?
Yeah, me and my parents have a pretty good relationship now, especially me and my dad. And
that's great.
He apologized, and this was actually after my parents got divorced about 6 years ago.
Okay.
Which was it pulled the curtain from this perfect family, because it's a small town. Everybody heard about it and everybody knew. And I'll go ahead and say it, but my mom had an affair. And it kind of just, everything that everybody believed, and this whole thing that we had built, on the social media side that everybody saw, just kind of came crumbling down. And everything was exposed. But we had this conversation. Obviously, my dad was in a pretty rough state, and so he apologized, and I kind of told him how I felt and some of the things that I experienced and noticed, and he said, no, you're right. I didn't do it right. I was a very angry kid, at the time. He was in his late 20s, early 30s at the time when I was a young kid, and he said, I had a lot of bad history. He said it's not an excuse, but it's just something that is the cards I was dealt, and I tried to do the best I could. And he did. He provided financially for us. He worked really hard. But ultimately, I think work kind of took precedence over just kind of being a dad. He was so worried about that, making sure the bills were paid, as opposed to, because me and my dad never really, when I was younger, had conversations like heart-to-heart conversations. And, so the only conversations I had like that was with my mom. And so when I used to try to talk to my dad about that kind of stuff, and he acted like he just kind of wasn't paying attention. So I just learned, I don't talk to dad about that kind of stuff. I just talk to mom about that kind of stuff. But yeah, our relationships are fine now. Me and my mom's still a little rocky here and there, but overall, we get along. So, but, going back to, I was involved in the church. Well,
yeah.
Fast forward a little bit, got into high school, and I had a good group of friends. We were kind of nerdy, and we would just sit, hang around each other and play video games every weekend. And, we didn't get into trouble. We didn't drink. So it was kind of a virtue to us, because we didn't do those things like our peers did. And so that was basically my entire high school. Didn't do anything crazy, no crazy stories. But then I turned 17, I graduated, I started hanging out with new friends. And that's when it started to kind of slowly fade. I just kind of pushed God off to the side, and started drinking, and getting involved in stuff I shouldn't. I had pride in the fact that I never did drugs, or so. But the way I was thinking and the way I was speaking, and it still was all just it was bad. And so then I joined the Army, and it started to get a little worse. I tried to go to church to make myself feel better about the things that I was doing, but that was pretty much the extent of my faith at the time. And
Oh yeah, I know that feeling when you're going to church to try to absolve yourself from what you were doing the night and 2 nights before, right?
Yep. Because I had that faith background and I had that
Mm-hmm.
conviction, right? It was always in the back of my mind, no matter what I was doing. And so, like you said, you just you go to church to feel better about yourself. And but I wasn't around godly men. There was nobody in my life at the time who was influencing me positively, keeping me accountable of things that I was doing wrong. And so I just was kind of a loose cannon, just doing whatever I wanted to do. And so that was, essentially the picture of my time in the Army. My relationship with the Lord was just not there. And then I got married to my first wife. And so the marriage itself, it wasn't started on faith. She wasn't really a Christian, and so but then we got divorced about 8 months later. And it just was, we were very young. We got married for the wrong reasons. We got divorced for the wrong reasons. There was just a lot of signs that I saw there that I didn't want to be a part of for the next 20 years. And so I won't go into super detail on that, but we ended up getting divorced. And after that divorce, everything leading up to that was a very pinnacle moment for me, because that's when I really went off the deep end. Sin had really just rooted itself so deep into me. And, I was heavily drinking, and I was sleeping around, and I was doing all the things that a young 20-year-old is told that he should be doing before he turns 30 and has kids. And you know what I mean? And, it was kind of like a flashbang, like the ringing, and it's just, you're disoriented, and it was just a blur for a few years. And, but there was still that deep conviction in me. Every now and then it kind of would seep out through everything. And I remember getting to a point after partying as long as I could, just having such a deep sense of regret. And I told myself, I'm going to try to work on my relationship with the Lord. And it was minimal effort, right? I still was just trying to focus on partying and doing the things that I wanted to do. And when I was by myself, maybe I'd talk to God a little bit about how terrible I was. And so, but then I met my wife now, and she really kicked me into gear. She's got a strong head. She's got a good mom and dad, and so we met, and then
hold on just a sec.
Yeah.
How long were you in the Army?
So I'm still in the Army.
Okay.
I was active duty for 3.5 years.
Okay, 3.5 active. And then, so how old were you when you got married?
To my first wife?
Yeah, your first marriage.
21.
Okay.
Still a baby, right?
Yeah. And so how old are you now?
I'm 30.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you I know you look so young. You've joked about it before, but guys are looking at you watching this on YouTube, and they're like, "How's this guy, got so much life experience and so many scars, and bumps and bruises, because you look like you're 19, but you're 30." So I love man, how God can use the right woman in our life. Man, that's incredible. That's where a lot of men's stories, mine included, they either take off for the better or they nosedive, right? And so this is the part of the story where I hear like the music start to play, right? Then God brings, this godly woman into your life. All right, keep going.
Yep. And so actually, I'm glad that you brought that up. So she she too didn't have a lot of faith background. And so for the first couple years of our marriage, it was, it was kind of the same thing. I didn't go party as much, but at the house we would just drink with each other, and you know, and so, but and when we get into arguments, it wasn't there wasn't that faith background, there wasn't that faith foundation, so,
Mm-hmm.
um, but so, and a lot of people will say this. So one of my other biggest turning points was 2020, that when COVID hit,
Mm-hmm.
and it really gave me time to sit there and think about a lot of things. So I found Order of Man. This is where I found Order of Man, Pursuit of Manliness, these kind of
Yep.
podcasts,
Yep.
right? And I'm hearing things that I'd never heard before, or maybe not explained in a way that it should have been. Provide, protect, provide for your wife and your family. And this is kind of what men should be doing. This is and this whole masculinity thing, right? Never heard of it. Never heard it this way before. And so I'm looking. I'm just kind of reflecting on my past, because I was always a wimpy guy, very passive. I was a small kid. Never really stood up for myself at all. I always had other people that were bigger than me that always stood up for me, um, and that's kind of an important part of the story. But um, just a wimpy, no backbone kind of kid, and that carried on into my early 20s, and so it kind of it lit this fire inside of me, and I just started doing things that I started. I bought a forge. I started forging and
Hmm.
like doing all these things, right? Um, and I really was trying to change the way I thought, and I was trying to give myself some like backbone, and just trying to change the way I spoke and was thinking. Um, Still kind of halfway trying to get right with the Lord, but that wasn't my main focus still.
Can
And
you can you give like an example of maybe some, you said change the way you spoke.
mhm.
Like what's an example of a way you spoke that you wanted to change?
So it say there maybe there's things that I heard that I just kind of put up with. Um,
Mm-hmm.
People would speak to me a certain way. People kind of walked all over me, and I didn't really do anything about it. And I wasn't trying to be, a douchebag about it, but I wanted to have some kind of like assertiveness when I spoke, so
Mm-hmm.
that people kind of had a little bit more respect for me than they did. Um,
That's something that a lot of people have a big struggle with is uh, finding the right spot in the middle,
mhm.
right? Some people think, oh, well, I don't want to be a total jerk, so I'll just be quiet. It's like they that makes it sound like a person only has two settings, like
Yeah.
0 or nuclear,
Hmm.
right? And so what you're describing, the way I hear it is like, and that's a big part of emotional maturity is be able to speak to somebody in the middle, right? Neither 0 nor nuclear, but be able to stand up for yourself, but do it in a very calm, polite, respectful, civil way.
Hmm. And which I had none of. I didn't have that ability. I was just fearful all the time, just afraid of conflict, and afraid to speak out against things that I saw that I didn't like. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, I knew if I was going to be married, and I'm going to be married to this woman, and we're going to have kids, and if I'm a pushover and I'm weak and I go into this thing, it's going to be a disaster, because
Yeah.
I had my parents, who one was, like you said, on the far, he was just belligerent most of the time, and then my mom just tried to baby us and protect us from everything. And
Mm-hmm.
so I had no good in between. It was either this or that. So I knew I had to figure it out. And so I dove so deep into it. Um I tried to listen to these podcasts and read these books and read these things that people posted online, watch these videos. I wanted to get so many different opinions from different men, because I also didn't have a lot of good men in my life that were implementing that, or showing that how to do that right. So I had to find it online, and I found a lot of good guys. And so um, all the while, I'd taken in so much information that I was like, I want to create a page, like an Instagram page.
Mm-hmm.
I want other guys kind of like me to see this stuff that I'm learning, because I just was keeping it to myself, for COVID. I was just sitting at the house all day, every day, and just locked in my head, and learning all these new things. And I was so excited, and I wanted other guys like me to see it. So that's what I did. I started an Instagram page, and it wasn't of Sound Mind at the time. I tried to find it. I can't remember. I think it was Sovereign Brotherhood is what it was called.
Mm.
And so that was the foundation of it. Was, here's what I'm learning, and I want other people to see it. And I just happen to be able to make some decently cool images. So I'll combine those two things. And so at first, it was just, I was kind of jumping on the masculinity train. All these new pages of masculine men pages started popping up, and I just kind of jumped on that train, right? And I just kind of followed along with what everybody else was doing. Same quotes, same Bible verses as everybody else, and just and then I changed it to Of Sound Mind. And at the time, I didn't really know why. I know I was reading through 2 Timothy, and I had seen that, and I was like, that's interesting. And so I just changed it to that. And so, because I liked how it sounded. But as I started to learn a little bit more about that, about, Paul, and he's in prison and he's writing to Timothy, I really started to admire this strength that Paul had, this courage. He's in prison, and he's writing to Timothy to be courageous, to not have fear. You are given a spirit of power and love and a sound mind. And and a sound mind is basically just the other translations, it's discipline, self-control. And so I didn't change it to a sound mind because I had a sound mind. It was a goal. Because I had lived my whole life in fear, and here Paul is telling us to not be afraid. With the Holy Spirit, we have a spirit of power and love and a sound mind, self-discipline, And so the Lord really started to work in me from 2020 and on. And obviously, I'm still a work in progress. I haven't achieved what I would like to achieve. When it comes,
none of us have.
I know, and it's a
even Paul didn't.
No, and I've accepted that it's a constant growth every day until I die. So, but there's a lot of different details that I could go on and on about, but ultimately that just kind of paints the picture of where I'm at now.
And so, how long have you been married now?
We've been married 5 years, together for 7.
Okay, and kids?
Yep, 2 daughters.
What are their ages?
One is 3 and one is 9 months old.
Oh my gosh!
And that's something else I want to say too. That's kind of the last part of the story is, and it happens, I feel like, for every man. As soon as we found out she was pregnant, it was go time. I had already started to try to build a foundation, especially with the Lord. But once we found out we were having a kid, especially a daughter, I didn't want my daughter to find a guy like I was. And so my goal, even still now, is to implement the father and the man that she needs to find when she gets older, that I want her to find,
Yeah, that's so good. Sons grow up to be like their fathers, and daughters grow up to marry a man like their father. So whether you have a son or a daughter, if you're a man listening to this, you've got to really step up your game. And I think your story resonates with so many guys, myself included, because it was like when we had our first baby that we actually started going back to church. It was like, yeah, not even right away, but we were like, okay, it's time to like dial it in. It's time to get serious about what kind of people do we want to be, what kind of husband, what kind of mom, what kind of family. Because you can kind of float through just being totally selfish in life, hedonistic, until you have a kid. And, you know, the day your first kid is born, I remember being in the hospital there, holding my baby, realizing, like, I just went from leading actor to supporting actor, right? You're no longer the star in this movie. You're now here to support somebody else and try to pour into them. They're the new star. You're here to help them. And man, that's a really heavy weight to wear. That's a sobering thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it scared the hell out of me.
Yeah.
Because
it's scary.
Yep. Because I just thought about who I was for years, you know, and it's like, you know, I can't play this game anymore. I got to figure it out, because now I've got somebody who's depending on me in more ways than just financially, or even just relationally. It's all everything. And so with a kid who grew up with not a lot of responsibilities, you know, not a lot of backbone, I think God knew that I needed a kid, because it completely just 180 on me.
You know, I think those things, like having a backbone, standing up for yourself more, being more assertive, but not in a rude way, those types of things that you've been talking about, those things take practice. Like, think about like everything else we are trying to be good at in life. They all take practice. But when it comes to that, people think like, oh, I wasn't like born naturally gifted in that. It's like, well, I don't think very many people are. It's like, it's kind of like, identify what it is you want to be, and then start practicing. And you're going to do well some days, and you're going to do not so well some days, but you keep moving towards the goal, right?
Right.
So I think when it comes to some of those traits that have to do with like how we speak to others, man, guys too quickly dismiss it out of like, I don't think I was born that way. I don't think I'm that type of a person. It's like, well, you can become that type of a person with some practice.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the podcast thing. So I too went down those same rabbit holes, you know, of listening to all the podcasts out there on manliness, you know, and this was like 10 years ago. About eight, nine years ago or so. And, you know, I dove down that rabbit hole, and I'm the kind of person that whenever I get into something, I overdo it immediately. You know, like, man, when I got into apologetics, I read like everything I could find on apologetics. I was listening to every podcast on it every day. And I was doing the same thing with manliness, just overdosing on those podcasts every day. But then, as with any topic, you eventually hit a point where you're like, okay, I think I've heard everything that they have to say. It's kind of all starting to repeat itself now. And then you eventually hit a point where you're like, okay, I think I need to take a break from this, because I could literally finish all their sentences on these podcasts. And, you know, the Order of Man was the second one that I got into. First, I got into Art of Manliness. Art of Manliness is fantastic. Order of Man, I started listening to these. There was a couple others, but, you know, the one thing that was missing in all of them was faith. You know, they're all tiptoeing around the edges of the example of manhood. The example is Jesus, right? So I don't know how you can do a podcast on manliness or masculinity and not have your entire thing centered around Jesus as the entire hub of your wheel, because that's who made us, that's who designed us, that's who wrote the user's manual for men.
Mm-hmm.
And that's who we're supposed to be emulating. So I feel like these guys like Brett McKay from Art of Manliness, or Ryan Mickler from Order of Man, who Ryan Mickler is a Mormon. I'm like 99% sure he's Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like these guys are very Judeo-Christian. Let's just say that at a minimum. But they don't talk about it, and they try to leave that out, and they try to separate it from their work,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a huge mistake. Even though I get it, they don't want to, they want to have a wider aperture, right? Like if you're selling Nikes, right, you don't want to sell them to only Christians because you're going to lose a lot of your market share. So they're like, hey, let's try to have listeners from all faiths. But I think that's actually counterintuitive when it comes to any topic of substance that's not just selling of shoes. And, part of your story is so similar to mine because you're like going into this journey of studying manliness. You jumped in with both feet and you hit that point where you're like, you know what? I think I could create something to start helping other men like me. Same thing for me. I'm listening to all these podcasts and I'm going to F3 and I'm doing all this stuff and I'm like, wait a minute. What if you just combine all this stuff, and why is everybody just praying to a higher power? And why is everybody just not talking about their faith? How can you do a podcast on manliness and not talk about the greatest man who ever lived?
Mm-hmm.
So kind of like you, I was like, man, let's put all this together and let's start something. And like you, I didn't start something because I had obtained it. I started something because I needed it, right? I was like, I need to be in a tribe. I need to be in an alliance. Hey, guys, is money holding you back from being used by God? If finances are a problem in your life and you're looking for some help, some counsel, some assistance financially, you've got to check out the Main Street Group. It's run by Tom Love, call sign Doc, with Tuckahoe Tribe. Okay, Doc is a certified financial planner. He's a fee-only fiduciary. He's a Dave Ramsey SmartVestor Pro. He uses Charles Schwab assets. He will help get you on course in ways that you didn't even know you were off course. He's not just a sponsor of the podcast, but my wife Carrie and I, we use him for our finances personally. He's helped us a ton. He's been ranked number 2 in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, number 1 in Style Weekly. He's a top 40, under 40 investor. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes. He is the man to see to get you on course financially. God saved Tom spiritually and physically, and God is the reason for Tom's success, and he wants to help others succeed also. So whenever you go see Tom Love, a.k.a. Doc, don't forget to mention that you are a part of Men's Alliance, and he will donate your first year of fees back to Men's Alliance nonprofit 501c3. So he's not only helping you, but he's helping our ministry as well. So do yourself a favor, go see the Main Street Group with Tom Love. It's in the show notes. Check it out. And as always, Dave Ramsey and Charles Schwab are separate entities, and past performance is no guarantee of future results. Check him out, the Main Street Group, Tom Love. All right, so this is a big part of both of our stories, is journeying through these manly podcasts and then starting our own ministries. So that was you, and you said 2020 was your big turning point. So here we are now, 24. Catch us up on like this year. What's happened in your life? And by the way, you got to come back and you got to explain a little bit on how you got the call sign Rebar.
Yeah.
But tell us about what's been going on with you this year in 24.
So this year, so I'll go back a little bit. So when I first started Of Sound Mind, I know you and I followed each other on Instagram for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
and I hadn't really looked too much into Men's Alliance, and so I remember we had talked about you coming on my podcast, and so you could get the word out about Men's Alliance, and so of course in preparation for the conversation, I looked into Men's Alliance, and I know I told you this before. It's something that I've been looking for, and I think with a little bit of context now you understand why.
Yeah.
And I never really had anything like that, and being in the Army and the whole workout aspect and the 3 levels of training, and there's these goals to obtain, and not only that, but you're around other dudes and you're building this relationship and you're doing hard things together. That's I mean, it was what I did for years, right, in the military, and that's also something that I yearned for, was that relationship, built on struggle with each other,
Yep.
and so um, that's something else. I just kind of dove all the way in, and I was like, "Yep, this is what I want to do," and so I went to Anvil Tribe for a few months, and it was a good distance away. It was about 50 minutes, and with 2 kids, it was kind of hard to get there and come back home at 9 o'clock, 9:30,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody's already in bed. So I was like, well, I already enjoy this a lot, so I'm just gonna start my own tribe. And so I did, and it's closer to home, and so there was a lot of uncertainty with it. There was only one other guy that was on board to starting it with me, and so I started reaching out to as many people as I could, like, hey, you want to come to this, check it out, send in the videos, send in all the things, um, and so we launched, and we had a good amount of people. It was probably 6 or 7 people that came, and that's been pretty consistent throughout this year. Um, and so it's been so cool to be able to do that. And of course, there's now things that I'm learning being put in a position like that, right? A leadership role where, um, each week, um, everybody's kind of looking to either me or whatnot to ensure that we have the stuff that we need. We have our leadership as well, who now does the fire and the workouts and everything. But um, it's awesome to see it every week. I love
When
it.
did you guys launch?
We launched February 8th.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. I think like 7 is like such a perfect number for the size of a tribe around the fire, because you can go really deep and really get to know 7 guys. Um, and it's better than having 2 or 3,
Mm-hmm.
because there's just a little bit more, conversation, but it's way better than having 20, because people get lost in the sauce. So
Mm-hmm.
you got the perfect setup there, and you have experience in both men's ministry, you have experience in military and leading workouts and all that kind of stuff. So I was so thrilled, when you were starting up Damascus. It's like, man, this is exactly what those men around Dayton need, and they don't even know that they need it yet. So this is going to be fantastic. And then, you happen to mention that you have some skill with making some graphic design. You're way too modest. Rebar crushes it, and all of our really cool social media posts are made by Rebar. I'll say that. He makes the awesome ones. But share with us how you got Rebar as your call sign.
Yeah. So there was when they were picking my call sign, it was taking a long time, and they were kind of struggling with what to pick. And so kind of last second, I was like, well, I forge, and
Oh yeah, just this one other little thing.
I
I make knives.
And so I was like, I beat the crap out of Rebar, because I'm kind of new and I'm learning, and so here's the really kind of crappy knife that I made, my first knife that I made.
You made that out of a piece of rebar?
Yep. So just smash the crap out of the rebar, and then here's the handle for it. So,
Dude, that is sick.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
And so they were like, rebar, that's awesome. That works.
Yeah.
And so, yep, that's the story.
So here you are now. You're the dad, and you've got one 3 and one 9 months. What are some of the aspects from your family of origin, from your mom and dad? What are some of the things that they did well that you want to copy and replicate as a dad now? And what are some of the things that you want to intentionally do different?
Yeah. I really, something that really stuck with me was how hard my dad worked. He started a business, and he started it from nothing, and then there was a storm in 2008 that hit, and it really took his business off. And but I mean, after that he started a second business just repairing phones, and that took off. And I mean, he always worked really hard, and he put his heart and soul into things that he did, and he was passionate about it. So I really admired that about my dad.
Yeah.
And then my mom, she was passionate as well. She was passionate about kids. And something I forgot to mention. So she started a small group at school. She was a teacher, and it was called Jesus Freaks. Okay. And
nice.
This was around the time when Young Life either was just starting, or maybe it hadn't started yet, but it was still kind of new. So it was kind of the same concept. During lunch on a certain day, you could come into her classroom and we'd read through the Bible, or we'd watch a film or a short clip or something. And so it was a Christian group at school. And what I really admired about that is she always got pushback from parents and teachers, and people wanted this thing to be shut down. And she battled for years against the system, against parents, and she kept this thing going. And in this group, she would take kids to our youth group and to concerts. And so she was exposing these kids to the Lord, and I really admired that.
Man, she was a barbarian.
Yeah, she was. And she was ruthless with it. So, but that was one of the things that I wrestled with when it came out that she had an affair. Because I was confused.
Yeah.
Here's this warrior for Christ, and but then I was angry for a long time about that, and I didn't speak to my mom for a long time. But I just thought about how David, David too was a warrior who also fell into the same kind of realm as that, and so God still used him.
Man, I am just never surprised by anybody's sexual sin.
Yeah.
Because we're all just human. And I know it's hard with a parent, because it's hard to not put a parent on a pedestal because they raised us. But, when pastors are caught in affairs, and it's just a huge deal. When Ravi Zacharias, when that whole thing came out, I gotta say, I was not surprised at all. And I didn't know him, but I just don't get surprised at anybody's affair, because, man, we're all human, and sexual sin is if you've got a heartbeat, you're susceptible to sexual sin. And the really scary thing is when somebody says something like, I would never do that. I would never put myself in. Like, dude, you don't know what you're saying.
Yeah.
And so I know that this is your mom, and that hits different, and I get that. But just, for our listeners, I'm like, man, absolutely not surprised when a man or woman of God falls in that way. And that doesn't negate all the good that the person has done either. We can't all go, burning the books that that Ravi wrote. He still wrote a lot of truth, even when all this junk comes out about him. Or name your Christian leader who's been caught in an affair, it doesn't negate all the good things that they did either.
Yeah. You know, and I had to humble myself and take the log out of my eye because um, something else I forgot to mention. You know, I was addicted to pornography for years,
Yeah.
and um, that was something that had its hooks kind of sunk deep, and obviously that's been overcome, but the temptation's always there.
Yeah.
But I had to look at myself and be like, now come on, you know, just because you're not having affairs physically, you know, you're doing this, you know. So it definitely helped with kind of restoring the relationship with my mom.
That's a really great point.
Mm-hmm. And so, um, you know, I just because I'm not perfect either, and I had to come to grips with that. So, um, but things that I didn't like that I want and I'm trying to do differently is how involved I am with my daughters. Um, you know, my dad tried, and you know, it's not like we didn't spend time together and do fun things. But ultimately, especially as I got a little bit older, I noticed that my dad, when he'd come home from work, he'd just kind of go sit on the computer, or they'd watch their shows, and I just kind of drifted away into my bedroom and just played video games all night, you know, and didn't really have much of a relationship with them, especially in my teenage years. And so I know it's hard, and teenagers are teenagers, and I get that. And I'm sure once I get there with these girls, it's going to be, you know, something similar. But I want to implement that, you know, I'm okay with spending time with you. I'm okay with, like, and also something else, you know, my dad didn't really teach me a lot of things. And so in my 20s now, I'm learning how to, uh, learning that I have to change an air filter for the house, and learning that I have to, and how to change a wax ring. I just changed the wax ring, and like none of these things were taught to me. And so I'm just learning
Yeah.
all these things. And so I want to, not only be there for my daughters, but I want to show them how to do certain things. And, you know, I want to put them in jujitsu. I'm in jujitsu, and I want to put them in there with me. Teach them how to fight, teach them how to shoot, and just be involved. Pray with them, pray for them, read the Bible with them. That's the biggest thing, because I never had that. I never had that time with my parents where they strengthened my faith, and that's why I think I don't blame them, but I think that has a lot to do with why I failed in my early 20s, and why I didn't. That wasn't my default go-to. Was my faith. So I definitely want to give them that foundation.
Man, that's so good. I think, you know, every family's goal should be for the next generation to be just a little bit sharper,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit stronger, a little bit faster, a little bit everything. More in tune to God, more in tune to finances, just everything. We want to like keep moving the ball forward generationally. We all want to be surpassed by our kids. At least we should if we're emotionally healthy.
Mm-hmm.
But then we have, you know, transitional generations where some piece of abuse happened to you, and you say, you know what, that pattern is going to end here with me, and I'm going to change the trajectory of the next generation. Instead of just passing on the same thing I received, I'm going to take that and I'm going to change it, and I'm going to pass on something better now. And I think that's a big part. Even if you have a pretty good family, if you have an okay upbringing, there's still ways you can look to, you know, nobody's a perfect parent. I'm not, and my parents weren't either, although they were pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
We can all look to our parents and find things that, you know what, I'm going to tweak this a little bit different, and I'm going to do a little bit better. But I guarantee every single one of us, although most of us will focus on the thing that we think we're doing better than our parents, in one way or another, there's going to be something more than likely that your parents did better than you're doing it. And that's, I think that's good just to acknowledge, because it kind of keeps us humble too.
Mm-hmm.
We can all look to this one thing that we're doing We're like, man, my parents never took us on vacation, and I'm taking my kids to Disney World. Okay, that's cool, but are you, you know, give your parents some credit in some area, and I think that's really cool. What you've done is you've explained something awesome from both your dad and your mom that you want to try to emulate.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also just kind of relieves, it's relieving. It takes a weight off your shoulders. Like, you know, I'm trying so hard to be perfect in all these areas, and it's okay that I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot that I have to learn, and that should be exciting to learn these things. You're going to experience, now we're in terrible threes, and so that's a whole new battle that we're facing, and that we're learning how to work together. It all kind of works together. Me and my wife are learning how to deal with it, together, and how we're going to parent this. And so it's just a great experience.
That's fantastic, man. So, all right, in closing here, um, if you could talk to a 18-year-old Cody Truitt, what would you tell yourself? What would you tell the 18-year-old you? What advice would you give?
Oh man. I think I'd tell him, because I wouldn't necessarily want to change what I did. There's a lot of regret there, but it definitely made me who I am now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd tell him, you're going to go through a lot of difficult things, and you've already gone through some pretty tough things. But you're going to be okay. And maybe you should try to pursue the Lord a little bit more than you do. Make sure that that's your foundation. But ultimately, you got to figure it out, because you've kind of been fed with a silver spoon your entire life. So, you got to figure it out, and just, that's the way the world works. So,
Yeah. I think, a big part of your story, men are going to relate to, because one of like the most Googled thing, I've heard this, and it's probably true, but I haven't verified it. One of the most Googled thing or searched up thing on YouTube is like how to tie a tie. Right. And I think that speaks to like the entire culture. And no matter what our dads were good at, there's going to be something that they didn't teach us that we need to know as men, or we want to learn as men. Maybe your dad was awesome at fixing cars, but, you're trying to get into woodworking and you never learned that, or vice versa, or whatever the case may be. My dad taught me how to change the oil in our cars, and he built a house, when I was like 12 and 13, and I got to help with some of those things. So I got the opportunity to do a lot of cool stuff. I know how to change the oil, but I don't know how to change the brakes and rotors. And I got some experience, helping swing some hammers and run some phone lines into a new home. But I had no idea how to skin a deer. So it's like, whatever it is our dads did, they probably handed us something, and we probably take that thing for granted, and then as men, there's also going to be knowledge that we want to have that we didn't get handed. And I think that what you're speaking to is, don't use the fact that your dad didn't hand it to you as an excuse for not going and getting it now.
Absolutely.
It's like, hey, if you want to know how to do something, go learn how to do it. You're the adult now. Quit blaming everything on the failures of your dad. If you want to learn how to skin a deer, go join a hunt club and start learning how to skin a deer. Whatever it is you need, emotionally, spiritually, I think we've got this generation up and coming now that I'm kind of scared is blaming everything on their parents. They're super in tune with their own feelings, and they've all been getting counselors left and right. So they speak all the counselors speak, and everything's somebody else's fault. Everything is the family's fault, their parents' fault, the school's fault, the government's fault. But I think, we've got so much online, if you don't know how to do something, man, go watch it on YouTube. Be proactive like you did, and go learn these things.
Mhm.
And then, you know, we've got to just stop making excuses for whatever we need, spiritually, especially.
Yeah.
Right. Especially when we start having kids. It's like, hey, like you said, the most important thing is praying for your kids and reading the Bible with them. And it doesn't matter, you know, what you got handed to you. You can take that and you can figure it out on your own. And that's kind of fun to make it up on your own. You get to kind of create some family traditions all your own.
Mm-hmm. And I definitely have to give credit to you and Men's Alliance for that, because you know, listening to the podcast and being around other guys that are doing it, praying with my family, not just praying for my family quietly when I go to sleep,
Right.
but like sitting my family down and like, hey, we're gonna pray together. And you know, I want us to do this, and I want them to see me reading the Bible when I'm sitting at the kitchen table. It's so awesome.
It
So
is, man. That's huge for your family to see you reading the Bible, which is one good argument for have an actual hard copy of the Bible that they see you reading, because if you're reading it on your phone, your kids don't know what you're doing on your phone, so they don't get to see you read the Bible. They're just assuming you're playing Angry Birds. So I think it's important. I try to do the same thing. Pick up the actual Bible, because I want my kids seeing that I'm reading the Bible. I want to normalize that in their life.
Yeah.
And also, I know that when I started leading a family devotion, I felt so unqualified and so awkward doing it, because it's like a major muscle movement. But if we normalize it, it is terrifying. If we normalize it, especially when they're younger, but you can start at any time,
Mm-hmm.
it instantly, it's not as hard or terrifying as you thought it was going to be as soon as you start.
Yeah.
Right. And I've done this so many times now, and it's always a little bit of a hurdle. But when you just say, hey guys, I want to share something with you that I was just reading. I just want to read you guys this one chapter, and tell me what you think about it. And you just kind of go in like that. You don't have to make it some big formal lesson, you know, with the dry erase board. But yeah, just the fact that you have decided, I want my kids to see this in me, I think that's where family change really happens.
Yeah, that's where it's got to change, I think, for the rest of our country, if we want to see, you know, if that's that's got to be the goal for every dad, just in my opinion, you know, to lead their family in that way.
Man, that's fantastic. So kudos to you, man. You're leading your family. You're leading yourself. You're also leading a tribe of men in Ohio. So, man, I just want to say thank you to you for the encouragement that you've